Hello and welcome back to Bible Reading and Discussion.
Racing through Romans.
Racing through Romans.
Maybe racing, maybe meandering.
Yeah, meandering. Not answering all of the questions, but answering enough
To get you on your journey.
to get you to think about these things.
Yes.
Ultimately, if we tell you everything,
It's not yours.
it's not yours. You got to discover it for yourself. So take what we say, make it your own.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just got to think about things in your own way.
Yeah,
I have mental
everybody's different,
images.
right? We were talking about that, about the ways that the gospel is approached in the various books of the New Testament to various audiences. We have a phrase, in other words. Well, your words may be different and still say the same thing.
Yeah, sometimes why you explain something three different ways is, and three different people latch onto,
Yeah.
oh, that one helped
Yes.
me.
I got that, yeah.
So, chapter 3,
You ready?
your turn.
Then what advantage has the Jew? So if he's been developing this argument, it would almost seem like it doesn't really matter, but it matters. Or what is the benefit of circumcision? He wants us to understand it's not a non-factor and it's not a bad thing or anything. Great in every respect. First of all, now he doesn't get to anything beyond first of all until probably chapter 9, but anyway, that's Paul for you. First of all, they were entrusted with the oracles of God. What then if some did not believe? Their unbelief will not nullify the faithfulness of God. May it never be. Rather, let God be found true, though every man be found a liar, as it is written, that you may be justified in your words and prevail when you are judged. So, he wants us to understand that what God did with the Jews was a good thing. It has advantages, but only if you take advantage.
Yeah. And, you think about it, how much further they are along than even the Gentiles who have come to Jesus. And yet, there's going to be a standard in which I even think when we get to Romans 14, part of them being the stronger brethren who know a little more, going to have to bear with.
Cut some slack.
Yeah.
Yes. But if our unrighteousness demonstrates the righteousness of God, what shall we say? The God who inflicts wrath is not unrighteous, is he? I'm speaking in human terms.
So, and there's the key. There are times where Paul has to explain things where people can understand it. And sometimes simplifying things can be an oversimplification, but it helps us to understand. Meaning, when God, though he made promises to the Jews, and he told them he would never leave them nor forsake them, but what has happened, what did Paul just say? But their unrighteousness has led them to what?
It opened up opportunities. It would have been better if they hadn't, but once they did, God will take advantage of that as well.
And God's wrath is a part of that plan as well.
It is.
So that we may see our need for Jesus, and later those who accept Jesus, even Jews, can be grafted back in.
So, you've had people say this to you. I've had Facebook in particular. Are you saying, and almost all the time, no, I'm not, and I don't understand why they think I do, but you have to go in and say some more.
Well, recently, I had a discussion with somebody who, because of their background, heard something that I taught, and they heard it one way. And then when I sat with them and talked with them and said, no, here's what I meant, and when they re-listened to it with my intentions behind it, they go,
Oh, okay.
I see that now.
Yes.
And so sometimes, even like these statements, we have to read and reread. And sometimes it's not till you read the whole letter. You kind of got to go back and go, okay, now that I have his full context, now I can go back and go, oh, when I first thought he was saying this, but I realized because I read over here, he wasn't saying that.
No,
he couldn't have been.
He couldn't have been, no. I had a person come out in the foyer one time years ago and said, you said, and then said something about one of their relatives that wasn't complimentary. I said, no, I didn't. Yes, you did. He got an elder, came over there. He said, so we went and listened to the tape. I didn't say that. But he thought I said it. He really, truly did.
And unfortunately, you're listening to the whole thing, you're kind of going, I got to re-listen to this just to prove to you I didn't say something.
But if through my lie the truth of God abounded to his glory, why am I also still being judged as a sinner? Why not say, as we are slanderously reported, and as some claim that we say, Let us do evil that good may come. Their condemnation is just.
And this argument is going to be picked up again in a different way. You know, well, if all of us are just, unrighteous and only righteousness comes through unrighteousness, it's kind of like, shall we sin so that grace may abound?
Yeah.
Well, since I'm already not good enough,
let's just do it.
let's just go all the way in. And
More grace.
once again, that's a mindset
No, that's not what I'm saying.
that
God forbid.
Jesus is trying to change. It's a mindset.
Yes. What then? Are we better than they? Not at all. For we've already charged that both Jews and Greeks are all under sin. Yes, we had an advantage.
But we're not better.
But are we better? No, we're not.
Yeah.
Both Jews and Greeks are all under sin, as it is written, and he's going to come up with like a million quotations here. There is none righteous, not even one. There is none who understands. There's none who seeks God. These are all hyperboles in a sense, but they have a truth to them as well. All have turned aside together. They have become useless. There is none who does good. There is not even one. Their throat is an open grave. With their tongues they keep deceiving. The poison of asps is under their lips, whose mouth is full of cursing and bitterness. Their feet are swift to shed blood. Destruction and misery are in their paths, and the path of peace they have not known. There is no fear of God before their eyes. So he assembles a number of things that if we take them in the absolute sense, they're all absolutely true because we're all sinners.
Yes. Well, and here's the thing, and you made a good point about these hyperboles, because there are people who take statements like, okay, no one does good. Therefore, anytime someone does a good thing who's outside of Jesus, it was for selfish reasons or unrighteous reasons.
Yeah,
There's,
that's going too far.
You help a lady across the street, well, what'd you want out of that?
Yeah.
What'd
Did you steal a purse? Or
there's always an evil, wicked motive, and that's not what he's pointing.
No.
Especially in the context of he's been using some hyperbole and he's been using some hypotheticals in the fact of goodness in saving yourself. Just because you helped a lady across the street doesn't make you a better person than the person who
And that's his point.
Yeah.
He wants us to know that in the sense of saving ourselves with our goodness, we're all so far away from it.
Yeah.
Now we know that whenever the law speaks, whatever the law speaks, it speaks to those who are under the law, so that every mouth may be closed and all the world may become accountable to God. Because by the works of the law, no flesh will be justified in his sight. Through the law comes the knowledge of sin. So here's another way of looking at the law that shows that, and Paul will get into this in his own personal life as a Jew later on in chapter 7. But here's the thing. The law, at the end of the day, because none of us are perfect, will look at us and say, you did not keep it.
Yes, and remember, he has been dealing with this Jew-Gentile relationship, and he's already talked about this idea of those who are under the law, those who are not under the law. I believe here he's still speaking of the law of Moses, of this law. And there are people who try to make the transition that he's talking about law in general, which the same application applies. You can go.
Yet.
But his point is that when the law speaks, because the law to the Gentiles, we've already said, is a moral, innate law. There's no speaking of it. This is talking about a revealed, something that has been revealed, a revealed law that is speaking.
Gordon Wenham, I think it is, in his commentary on Romans, highlights 5 different ways that Paul uses law. And one of them is he uses the law of Moses to represent the concept of law.
Yeah.
He uses the law of Moses as the law of Moses.
Yeah.
And sometimes that can be a little tricky, but I agree. I think that this is the law of Moses.
Yeah, because through the law comes the knowledge of sin. And Paul's going to bring that back up in Romans chapter 7.
Yes.
That when he read the law of Moses, and he read, you shall not covet, he's like, he realized, right? So there was a revelation of law that caused him to realize that a sin is utterly sinful, right? This utterly sinful.
Utterly sinful. You don't even talk about being just.
And I think what he does here is he kind of turns, is there an advantage? Yes.
Yes.
But is there a disadvantage as well?
Yes.
Yes, because as you said, as you receive more is expected.
The Gentile isn't going to run afoul of dietary laws.
No.
But once they had the law of Moses, they got that and goodness knows how much stuff.
Yeah, I mean, when you only have a moral law to keep, in a sense,
Eat a catfish anytime you want to.
In a sense, it would be easier to be a Gentile, to just kind of be a good person and morally, don't murder, don't steal, those kinds of things, rather than, okay, first 14th day of the first month, you got to go Passover. You got to do the Passover this way. You got to keep temple. You got to have temple this way. If you're unright,
And yet, at the end of chapter 5, he says, as the law increased, grace increased.
Yeah.
So God's got it all covered. He's just got a handle on it.
but He wants everybody to see at any moment we're all entrapped in the same thing, but we're also all have that God's hands outstretched, and all we need to do is take it.
Exactly.
We're at the same distance from God, no matter the sin. So,
Is it your turn?
yep.
Okay.
But now, the righteousness of God has been manifested apart from the law.
And this has got to be law of Moses, I think.
Yeah. Although the law and the prophets, and that's where it is, the law and the prophets bear witness to it. So, once again, righteousness has to come separate from the law, because law itself is a perfect command keeping. Though what he's going to give us a hint at, he's going to explain later again, is that the law talked about this righteousness. And even was, you should have been able to read it and saw that, okay, righteousness has to come from somewhere other than.
It was more than just do's and don'ts.
As Job recognized, that this righteousness, for me to be able to communicate with God and be on par with God, not on par, but have a relationship with God, there's got to be a mediator.
Galatians 3, if a law could have been given that would have done the job, well, of course we wouldn't have Jesus crucified, but that wouldn't work.
The law is not a mediator. The law is really what we need mediated from.
Yeah, and it's the as we'll see soon,
Yeah.
it's sort of the standard for faith. How do we express ourselves?
Yep.
Well, Revelation gives us our faith guidance, if you will, but apart from it being done in faith, it just condemns us.
So the righteousness of God through faith in Jesus Christ for all who believe, for there is no distinction. Here we go. For all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, and are justified by His grace as a gift through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus. So once again, all of this works out. Obedience of faith, a faith that moves, a faith that has compassion, a faith that even keeps the law,
Yeah, far from just a static, I believe.
is a gift.
Yes.
Still, our salvation is a gift.
God didn't have to make that available to us.
No. And so, whom God put forward as a propitiation, or a substitute, if you want to think of it that way, by His blood to be received by faith. This was to show God's righteousness, because in His divine forbearance He had passed over former sins. So when you read Romans 1 and 2 and you realize, why has God not ended this world now?
Yeah, which He could have done like 5 minutes after the forbidden fruit.
So which sin did He forbear? Was it the Gentile sin or the Jew sin? Both.
Everybody.
Right? It was to show His righteousness, and at the present time, so that He might be just and the justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus.
God is going to be just in all of this. He's not just a willy-nilly, okay, we'll just forget about it.
Well, because remember, being righteous also means that God is righteous, means He's being just. And when He says, if you eat of this fruit, you shall surely die. The penalty of sin is death. Well, where is the death? Where is the eternal death? Why didn't He end the world? Why are, Satan almost in a sense has like, God, you're being unfair in their favor.
In their favor.
In their favor.
Because He's being fair, but it is in their favor. It is in our favor. We need grace.
Yes. And so when Jesus comes, Satan no longer has an accusation, Revelation 12, against us, because the price has been paid.
Who will bring a charge against God's elect? Romans 8.
No one.
27.
Then what becomes of our boasting?
Forget about it.
If you've read up to this point, what boasting does anybody have?
Nothing.
It is excluded. By what kind of law? By the law of works?
No.
No, but by the law of faith.
Paul will talk about the fact in Galatians that the only thing he'll boast in is the cross.
Yep. For we hold that one is justified by faith apart from the works of the law. And that law could be both. Could be law of Moses. Could be law of Moses
works of
representing
law.
all of
It could maybe Moses representing the bigger picture of law. Yes. And by that, because James is going to say works save. It depends on what are you talking about. Are you talking about absolutely? Well, works can't absolutely save. Only Jesus can. Is it instrumental? Well, yeah. It's not just don't worry about it. We have to be faithful.
If faith doesn't have a follow-through, it's not faith at all.
No, we're not walking in the light. We're just sitting somewhere.
then we think one act, whether it was you believe you prayed for salvation or baptized for salvation, as you said, then you act as if
Yeah.
we were saved by this one
Yeah.
act we did,
We
therefore
got
we're
it.
good.
We got it. Yeah.
And there's not this transformation that happens. And the transformation needs to come from the fact that look at the grace and the forbearance and the mercy and the patience of God in this.
It's our motivation.
Yeah.
The love of Christ. It's a strong. I mean, look at people who do things because of love today and put themselves out, sacrifice themselves out of the motivation of love. It's strong.
Yeah, and you can tell the difference between
yes.
someone who's feeling obligated.
Yeah, and somebody who's
Genuine.
yes, you can.
All right, so, or is God the God of the Jews only? Is he not the God of the Gentiles also? Yes, of Gentiles also. Since God is one, who will justify the circumcised by faith and the uncircumcised through faith? Do we then overthrow the law by this faith? By no means. On the contrary, we uphold the law.
Or establish it. We, as you said earlier, we give the reason. What part does it play? We put it in its place. It has a place. We're not trashing law per se. We're trashing the concept that thinks we can be saved by keeping law in ourselves.
It sounds a whole lot like what Jesus does. Don't think what I'm coming to do
Yeah, yeah.
is to fight against the law. Because without knowing the commandments, you wouldn't even know what Jesus is talking about in the Sermon on the Mount. Without knowing the law. But that's the very heart and the mind of God. He's making you into a new person. You're supposed to go, the law is supposed to take you beyond the law.
Yes.
Meaning, the do not murder
Yes.
means you shall not hate. But can you get that just from the letter of the law?
You
No.
got to get into it and see how it works out.
It needs to mold you
Yes.
and transform
Matthew 23:23. They're tithing mint and dill and cumin, but they've neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. He says, you ought to have done these without neglecting the other. And he likens it in Semitic humor that would have gotten their attention. You're straining out a gnat and swallowing a camel. That's what this looks like when you do it this way.
So Paul's saying, don't misinterpret what I'm saying. Don't think for a moment that I don't think there's an advantage to the Jews, that I don't think the law is just old and antiquated and outdated, but it had a purpose and it had a place.
Yes.
And its place is not salvation. Its place is to know. It's to show us how much we need.
Yes, to guide our faithful responses, things like that. You could say, here's a legalist, and here's a person of faith, and here's the law. They both go to it, but they go to it with for different reasons.
Yeah. And then in the next chapter, he's going to use Abraham kind of as the prime
good old Abe.
example of just putting your faith and trust in God.
What's it look like? Looks like Abraham.
Going places
It
you
gets a
don't
little
know.
messy every once in a while.
Yeah. And Abraham was saved, before the law of Moses was given.
Imagine that.
So, and if he's your father,
Yeah,
which I don't think they ever connected that.
Yeah.
They probably just never put that together.
Probably not. Oh, yeah, that's right.
Wait, Abraham's
Yeah.
that would shatter their
Yes.
entire concept.
You mean Abraham wasn't circumcised? Or Abraham wasn't under the law of Moses?
Yeah. So, all right. Well, there's Romans chapter 3. Once again, we just Bible reading and discussion, trying to let you figure some of this stuff out, giving you some helps maybe. And if you have discussion questions, things you want us to explain a little further,
These require a little more thinking than some of the things we've done.
yeah, you can't just read this once and walk away going, "Oh, I know exactly what he's
Those
saying."
are summations. So this can't mean that because he says that.
Yeah.
Get the whole thing.
Absolutely. So, but we love you.
Yes,